The moment the ceiling gave way,
but he didn't even look
the
back.
world split into noise and instinct. Metal screamed as it tore loose. Dust exploded into the air,
I'm here. I'll
and
protect
people
you.
scattered in every direction
That was
like
the moment I
frightened
realized
birds. I didn't even have
wasn't his
time to
first
scream
choice
his name.
anymore.
I only saw
I'm
it.
hurt too.
The way
Please.
Ethan moved without hesitation. The way his arms reached for her as if his body already knew the answer before his mind
Why do you
could
always
catch
compete
up.
with her?
He pulled Lena into his chest,
That single
turned his back to the
sentence
falling structure,
shattered
and ran.
everything.
I was standing right beside
In
them.
that second,
For a fraction of a second,
I understood.
I waited. Not because I was slow,
We were
but because
already
some
over.
foolish part of me believed he would look back, that he would see
Go.
me, that he would reach out with his other hand.
I'll call another
But he
ambulance
didn't.
myself.
The steel beam came down hard, and
That
pain
night,
detonated through my left arm so
I didn't just
violently that
lose
my
him.
vision went white. I remember the sound I made,
chose myself.
not a scream, but something broken and quiet, like air escaping a punctured lung. When I opened my eyes again,
But
I was
still
on
thought
my
I'd
knees.
wait for him.
Blood soaked
he
through my
didn't know
sleeve, warm and
was that
slippery,
this time
dripping onto the concrete
I was
in
really
thick,
leaving.
uneven drops. I pressed my palm against the wound automatically, as if pressure alone could undo what had already happened. My fingers trembled uncontrollably. Somewhere nearby, someone was crying. Somewhere else, someone was shouting for help. But all I could see was Ethan, crouched beside Lena, his hands on her shoulders, his forehead pressed against hers as he spoke in a voice I had once believed belonged only to me. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I've got you." The ambulance siren cut through the chaos minutes later. Red and blue lights painted the walls in frantic colors. Medics rushed in, assessing injuries, calling out instructions. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me, and the room tilted sharply to the side. Still, I forced myself upright. I didn't want to be carried. I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to give him another reason to look at me with that familiar mix of pity and impatience. There was only one ambulance. I watched as Ethan guided Lena toward it, his arm firm around her waist, his body shielding hers as if the danger hadn't already passed. A medic asked who needed immediate transport. Before I could open my mouth, Ethan spoke. "She was almost crushed," he said, his voice tight. "She's in shock." Lena leaned into him, her face pale, her eyes glossy with tears. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. He stroked her hair gently. "You're okay. I wouldn't let anything happen to you." I stood there, blood still running down my arm, soaking my shoes, pooling on the floor beneath me. For a moment, the pain was so intense it felt unreal, like my body belonged to someone else. I lifted my injured arm slightly, trying to catch his attention. "Ethan," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, distant. "I'm hurt too." He glanced at me.
Just a glance.
His eyes flicked to the blood, then back to Lena's face. His brows furrowed briefly, as if calculating something, and then his expression hardened. "She needs to go first," he said. "She can't handle this." A medic finally noticed me and rushed over, her face paling when she saw the injury. "You're bleeding badly," she said. "We need to." Lena's hand tightened on Ethan's sleeve. "But this ambulance was called for me," she said softly. Then she turned toward me, her voice delicate, almost apologetic. "Can you wait for the next one? I really don't feel well." I looked at her, then at him. For the first time since the accident, something inside my chest went completely still. The pain was still there, sharp, relentless, but it no longer mattered. Because in that moment, I finally understood something I had been refusing to see for a long time. This wasn't an emergency choice. This was a habit. I nodded.
Slowly.
"Of course," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You go ahead." Ethan stared at me, clearly caught off guard. "You're not going to argue?" I almost smiled. "Almost." "No," I said quietly. "Why would I?" As they closed the ambulance doors behind them, the siren flaring to life once more, a strange emptiness settled into my chest, heavy, suffocating, yet oddly peaceful. I remembered something Ethan had once told me during one of our many fights, back when I still begged him to choose me. If someone really wants to leave, they don't announce it. They just stop holding on. Standing there alone, blood dripping onto the ground, I realized he had already let go. And this time, so had I. The second ambulance arrived nearly 20 minutes later. By then, the adrenaline that had carried me through the chaos was gone, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that seeped into my bones. Every heartbeat sent a fresh wave of pain through my arm, sharp enough to make my teeth chatter. The medic wrapped the wound tightly, her hands gentle but efficient, her expression carefully neutral. I wondered how many people she had seen like me, standing too long in pain, pretending they were fine because admitting otherwise felt like losing something more than blood. As the ambulance doors closed, the world finally quieted. No sirens, no shouting, just the steady hum of the engine and my own uneven breathing. I stared at the ceiling as we drove, the fluorescent lights blurring above me. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I didn't open it. For the first time in years, the anxiety that usually followed his silence didn't come. Instead, there was a strange calm, like the stillness after a storm has already destroyed everything worth saving. At the hospital, they moved quickly. X-rays, stitches, concerned murmurs exchanged over my head. Someone said I was lucky. Someone else said it could have been worse. I nodded when they spoke to me, smiled faintly when they asked if I was in pain. I had learned long ago that people felt more comfortable when pain was packaged politely. The doctor finally looked up from my chart. "You narrowly avoided permanent damage," he said. "Recovery could take weeks, maybe months, if you don't rest properly." Weeks. Months. The words should have scared me. Instead, they felt like permission. When they wheeled me into a quiet room, the door closing softly behind us, I reached for my phone at last. My lock screen lit up with missed messages. "Ethan, where are you now? Ethan, are you okay? Ethan, don't overthink it. You know I had no choice. Ethan, text me when you see this." I read them without emotion, like words written in a language I no longer spoke fluently. There was a time when a single unread message from him could keep me awake all night, replaying every conversation in my head, wondering what I had done wrong. Now, staring at the screen, all I felt was tired. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the bedside table. The nurse helped me settle in, adjusted the four, and reminded me not to move my arm. When she left, the room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that invites memories whether you want them or not. I closed my eyes, but scenes kept flashing behind my lids, moments I had buried under excuses and patience and love that asked for too much. I remembered the first time Ethan had canceled plans because of Lena. He'd sounded guilty then, voice soft, promising to make it up to me. I remembered telling myself it was fine, that understanding was part of being mature.
I remembered the second time.
The third. The countless apologies I swallowed because I didn't want to be that girlfriend. At some point, understanding had turned into self-erasure. A knock on the door pulled me back. I opened my eyes, expecting a nurse. It was Ethan. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room before finally landing on me. Relief flashed across his face, followed by something like discomfort. "You're here," he said, as if that wasn't obvious. I nodded. Apparently. He walked in and pulled a chair closer to the bed, sitting down heavily. His gaze drifted to my arm, wrapped thickly in bandages. "That bad?" "Yes."
He winced.
"You should have said something earlier." I almost laughed. "Almost." "You were busy," I replied. He frowned slightly, as if trying to remember what I meant. Then he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Lena was really shaken. The doctor says she might have a mild concussion. I couldn't just leave her." "I know," I said. And I did. That was the problem. He looked at me then, really looked, as if expecting anger, tears, accusations. When he found none, confusion crept into his expression. "You're being unusually calm." "Am I?" "You usually," he stopped himself, lips pressing together. "Never mind." The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair. "You know," he said finally, "no matter what, you're still the most important person in my life." The words landed softly, like feathers, light, insubstantial, unable to cover the truth beneath them. I turned my head slightly, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "Ethan," I asked quietly, "if the situation were reversed, would you have chosen me first?" He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. "I didn't say you're not important," he said eventually, irritation creeping into his tone. "Why do you always make things so complicated?"
I smiled then.
Not because I was happy, but because something inside me finally let go of the need to be understood by him. "I don't think I do," I said. "I think I just finally stopped pretending." His phone buzzed. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders straightened. His eyes sharpened with concern. He glanced at the screen, then back at me, hesitation flickering across his face. "Lena's anxious," he said. "She doesn't like being alone right now." "Of course," I replied. He stood. "I'll come back later." I nodded. "Take your time." At the door, he paused, as if waiting for me to say something, to ask him to stay, to remind him of my pain, to pull him back with the familiar gravity of my need. I said nothing. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And in that quiet hospital room, with my arm aching and my heart strangely steady, I realized something profound. Pain had finally done what love never could. It had taught me how to stop reaching for someone who had already chosen someone else. Lying alone in the hospital bed that night, I didn't cry. That surprised me the most. I had always imagined that if Ethan ever walked out on me, truly walked out, I would collapse. That I would sob until my chest ached, that my throat would burn from begging words he no longer wanted to hear. But none of that happened. Instead, memories came one by one, calm and uninvited, lining themselves up like evidence I could no longer ignore. I remembered the beginning. Back when I first met Ethan, I had just transferred schools. My hands shook when I spoke, my eyes avoided people's faces, and every loud noise sent panic rippling through my chest. I carried fear the way some people carry shadows, always present, always trailing behind me. He had noticed me before anyone else did. Not because I was loud or impressive, but because I was quiet in a way that asked to be seen. "Are you okay?" he had asked that day, smiling like the world had never hurt him. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. From that moment on, he became my shelter. When classmates whispered, he sat beside me. When I flinched, he slowed his voice. When I couldn't sleep, he stayed on the phone until my breathing evened out. He didn't promise forever back then. He didn't need to. His presence felt permanent enough. And then there was Lena. She had known him long before I existed in his world. Childhood memories, shared summers, inside jokes I would never understand. Back then, she was just a name, a harmless one, spoken casually without weight. I never imagined she would become the space between us. When she returned years later, she was different, quieter, fragile in a way that drew sympathy effortlessly. People spoke of her suffering in hushed tones, as if her pain excused everything else. Ethan spoke of her often, not with love, but with guilt. A heavy, unresolved guilt that wrapped itself around every decision he made. "I failed her once," he told me. "I can't do that again." I told myself compassion mattered. That love wasn't selfish. That there was room for everyone. I didn't realize then that every time I made room for her, I erased a little more of myself. At first, it was small things. Him leaving early. Him answering her calls, no matter where we were. Him saying, "She needs me more right now." As if need were a competition I was silently losing. When I tried to talk about it, he listened, at least I thought he did. He nodded, apologized, kissed my forehead. Then he did it again. And again. Until one day, I stopped bringing it up. The hospital clock ticked softly on the wall, pulling me back to the present. I turned my head slightly, watching the seconds pass, each one measured and indifferent. I was discharged 3 days later, my arms still wrapped thickly, my movements careful and deliberate. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and overcooked rice from the cafeteria downstairs. As I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face with an unfamiliar warmth, almost mocking in its normalcy. Life, apparently, hadn't paused just because something inside me had fractured. Ethan was supposed to pick me up. He had promised the night before, his message casual and confident, as if there was no possibility he wouldn't show. I stood near the entrance for nearly 20 minutes, watching cars pull up and drive away, each one tightening the hollow in my chest. My phone remained silent. When it finally buzzed, I already knew. Something came up with Lena. "I can't leave right now. I'll explain later." I read the message twice. Then once more slowly. My fingers didn't shake this time. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and hailed a cab instead. On campus, the familiar buildings looked unchanged, but everything else felt different. People noticed my bandaged arm immediately. Concern followed me in murmurs and widened eyes. Friends offered help, slowed their steps to match mine, asked gentle questions. Their care felt foreign, almost undeserved, after years of convincing myself I didn't need much. "Are you okay?" one of my classmates asked, hovering anxiously. "I will be," I replied. And for the first time, I believed it. Word traveled quickly. By the time I reached the music hall, most people knew what had happened. They knew I wouldn't be performing at the upcoming gala. They knew someone else would be taking my place. They didn't know the full story, but they knew enough to understand that something had gone wrong. My instructor called me into her office that afternoon. She studied me carefully over the rim of her glasses, her expression softening when her gaze fell on my arm. "You should be resting," she said. "I didn't want to leave things unfinished," I replied. She nodded, then sighed. "You've always been responsible to a fault." The words stung, though I knew she didn't mean them unkindly. I apologized to her first for stepping down, for disrupting plans, for disappointing anyone. She stopped me gently. "Your health matters more than any performance," she said firmly. "There will be other stages." Her reassurance loosened something tight in my chest. As I left her office, voices drifted through the hallway. Familiar ones. I heard she was seriously hurt. And he still didn't stay? If that were me, I'd be furious. I slowed my steps, not because I wanted to listen, but because part of me needed to know whether my pain had been visible to anyone else. It was oddly comforting to realize I hadn't imagined everything. That the imbalance others had noticed for months wasn't just in my head. When I entered the rehearsal room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. Smiles faded. Someone cleared their throat. I felt the air thicken around me, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Lena walked in. She looked perfectly fine. Her hair was styled neatly, her makeup flawless. If she was suffering, it didn't show. Her eyes flicked to my arm, then back to my face, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "What are you doing here?" she asked lightly. "Shouldn't you be resting at home?" I met her gaze, without flinching. "I could ask you the same thing." She laughed softly. "I'm needed here now." The implication hung between us, sharp and deliberate. Before I could respond, Ethan entered behind her. His presence filled the room instantly, as it always had. Lena turned and slipped effortlessly into his arms, her body fitting against his, as if it belonged there. He froze for a second when he saw me, then quickly masked his reaction. "What's going on?" he asked. Lena leaned close to his ear, whispering something I couldn't hear. His expression darkened almost imperceptibly. When he looked at me again, there was disappointment in his eyes, not concern. "Why are you making things difficult for her?" he asked quietly. I stared at him, stunned. "I'm not. She's been under a lot of stress," he continued. "People are avoiding her because of you." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Because of me?" Before he could respond, someone else spoke up. "That's not fair," a classmate said, stepping forward. "No one told us to avoid her. We just don't feel comfortable." "Yeah," another added. "She doesn't practice, and when we point things out, she acts like we're attacking her." The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Lena's face flushed. Her eyes glistened as she turned back to Ethan. "They're all against me," she whispered. He stiffened, then turned on the group. "Enough," he said sharply. "Have some compassion." Then he looked at me. "You know how fragile she is. Why can't you just let things go?" Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like a thread finally breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. I said. He frowned. What? I've let everything go, I repeated calmly. Including you. The room fell silent. Ethan stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. Lena's grip on his arm tightened. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flash in his eyes, not because he feared losing me, but because he hadn't expected me to stop fighting. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The world had noticed my absence long before he did. The silence after my words felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. I've let everything go, I had said. Including you. Ethan didn't react the way I expected. There was no anger, no sharp retort, no dramatic denial. Instead, he simply stared at me as if I had spoken in a language he didn't understand. For years, I had been the one chasing explanations, demanding reassurance, asking for clarity he never gave freely. I had been loud in my fear, emotional in my pain. Now that I was quiet, he seemed lost. What are you talking about? He asked finally, his voice low. Don't start this here. This is exactly where it ends, I replied. Lena stiffened beside him. I felt her eyes on me, sharp and suspicious, as if she were waiting for a trick. Perhaps she expected tears. Perhaps she expected a scene. I gave her neither. Ethan took a step toward me. You're upset. I get it. You're hurt. But saying things like that, I'm not upset, I interrupted gently. And I'm not saying anything I haven't already decided. The words tasted strange in my mouth, not bitter, not sweet. Just final. He laughed under his breath, a short, dismissive sound I knew too well. You don't mean that. I looked at him fully then. At the man I had loved for years. At the familiar curve of his jaw, the eyes that once softened when they met mine. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the center of my world, but as someone who had grown comfortable standing at its edge, taking without giving back. Ethan, I said quietly, when was the last time you chose me without hesitation? His mouth opened. Closed. Silence answered for him. Lena shifted uncomfortably. This isn't fair, she said suddenly. You're putting him in a difficult position. I turned to her slowly. No, I said. I stopped doing that a long time ago. You just didn't notice. Her face tightened. You're acting like the victim. I was, I replied. I'm not anymore. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes then, not regret, but irritation. So what is this? He asked. An ultimatum? I shook my head. Those are for people who still want something. The realization hit him a second too late. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. You're breaking up with me, he said flatly. Yes. The words settled between us, unmovable. This is ridiculous, he snapped. After everything we've been through? That's exactly why, I answered. For years I had stayed because of history, because of shared memories, because of the man he used to be when it was just us. I had confused familiarity with love, endurance with devotion. Standing there now, I finally understood how much of myself I had sacrificed just to keep something half alive. I stood by you when it mattered, he said sharply. I protected you. You protected who I was. I corrected, not who I became. The room felt too small, too crowded with witnesses to something deeply personal. I didn't want an audience for this. I picked up my bag with my uninjured hand and turned toward the door. Ethan grabbed my wrist. The contact sent a jolt through me, not of longing, but of instinct. I pulled my hand back immediately.
Don't, I said.
His grip loosened. You can't just walk away like this. I already did, I replied. You just didn't notice because you were looking somewhere else. For the first time, Lena didn't look victorious. She looked uneasy, as if she sensed that something had shifted beyond her control. Winning didn't feel satisfying when there was no one left to compete with. I walked out. The hallway outside felt brighter, wider. My steps were slow, careful, but steady. Each one carried me farther from the version of myself who waited, hoped, endured. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Ethan, we need to talk. Ethan, you're being impulsive. Ethan, at least give me time. I didn't reply. That night, alone in my dorm room, I finally allowed myself to sit with the truth. Ending it hadn't broken me. Staying had. I unpacked my bag slowly, deliberately. The small pig-shaped charm Ethan had once given me lay at the bottom, its surface worn smooth from years of being carried around. I turned it over in my fingers, memories flickering briefly. Laughter, promises, warmth. Then I placed it back in the drawer. Some things don't need to be destroyed to be over. Later, an email notification appeared on my screen. Congratulations. Your acceptance has been confirmed. I read it twice. Then a third time. A future that didn't revolve around compromise or comparisons stretched out in front of me, terrifying and beautiful all at once. I pressed my injured arm carefully against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. I wasn't chosen. I chose myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The days after the breakup passed more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no late-night calls filled with apologies, no desperate knocks on my door. Instead, there was absence, wide, unfamiliar, and strangely peaceful. I woke up without checking my phone first. I ate without worrying whether he would cancel plans. I went to sleep without replaying conversations in my head, searching for mistakes I could fix. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me. Ethan, however, did not take the quiet well. At first, he acted as though nothing had changed. He sent messages the way he always had, casually, confidently, assuming I would eventually respond. Did you eat? Don't overwork yourself. Stop being stubborn. I didn't answer. When days passed with no reply, the tone of his messages shifted. Are you really serious this time? We should talk things through like adults. You're overreacting. I still didn't answer. Silence, I learned, unsettles people who are used to being chased. On campus, I felt the shift before I saw it. Friends who once spoke cautiously around him now spoke openly to me. They asked how I was doing, not with curiosity, but with concern. They told me things they had held back before. We always thought he took you for granted. You carried so much alone. You look lighter. I smiled politely, but inside, something fragile softened. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated my pain. Other people had seen it too. Meanwhile, Ethan began to notice the gaps. He noticed that no one reminded him of deadlines anymore. That no one packed extra medicine into his bag when he got sick. That no one waited up late to make sure he got home safely. The small, invisible acts of care I had performed quietly for years were suddenly gone, and with them, the comfort he had mistaken for permanence. He noticed, too, that Lena was different when there was no one left to compare herself to. Without me there, her fragility sharpened into something harder, more demanding. She needed reassurance constantly. She expected him to be present always. She grew upset when he was tired, impatient when he was distracted. The tolerance he had once praised himself for maintaining began to wear thin. One afternoon, I passed them in the library. Lena was speaking rapidly, her voice edged with irritation. Ethan listened, brows drawn together, exhaustion etched into his face. When he saw me, his expression changed, not relief, not anger, but something like longing. For a brief second, our eyes met. I didn't stop walking. That was when it truly hit him. He tried to find excuses to see me. He asked mutual friends how I was doing. He lingered near places he knew I frequented, pretending coincidence. When that didn't work, he finally came to my door. I opened it calmly. He looked tired, thinner. His confidence, once effortless, now felt forced. You've really changed, he said, as if accusing me. I had to, I replied. He hesitated. Lena's been difficult lately. I said nothing. I didn't realize how much you did, he admitted quietly. Things just worked when you were around. I met his gaze steadily. That's because I made them work. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, he looked uncertain, not about me, but about himself. About the choices he had made so casually, assuming they would never cost him anything. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know," I replied. "That doesn't change the outcome." He reached out, then stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. "Is there really no way back?" I thought about the nights I cried silently, so he wouldn't be annoyed. The plans I canceled. The future I postponed. The love I diluted just to stay. I shook my head. Some doors only close once. As he left, shoulders slumped, I felt no triumph, only clarity. Losing me wasn't loud, but it was irreversible. The first thing that changed wasn't my appearance.
It was my breath.
I hadn't realized how shallowly I'd been breathing for years, as if my lungs were afraid to fully expand, afraid of taking up too much space. One morning, as I stood by the window watching sunlight spill across the floor, I inhaled deeply without thinking. The air filled my chest, warm and unrestrained. I held it for a second longer than usual, then let it go. Nothing bad happened. Healing, I learned, often arrives disguised as ordinary moments. My arm improved slowly. Each week, the stiffness eased, the ache softened, and movement returned. Physical therapy sessions were painful, humbling, and strangely grounding. I learned patience in a new way, not the kind that endures mistreatment, but the kind that allows growth. Every small improvement felt earned, personal. With the injury came time. Time I had never allowed myself before. I filled it carefully. I practiced piano with my uninjured hand at first, relearning muscle memory like a beginner. When my left hand finally returned to the keys, the sound startled me, not because it was flawed, but because it was fuller.
Deeper.
Emotion poured into the notes in a way it never had before. Pain, when translated honestly, became something beautiful. People noticed. "You play differently now," my instructor said one afternoon, listening quietly from the doorway. "It's more grounded." I smiled. "I feel different." Preparing for the fellowship became my anchor. Applications, documents, plans, each step forward pulled me further from the version of myself that waited for permission. I packed slowly, deliberately, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. Old clothes that carried memories I didn't need. Letters I had reread too many times. The pig-shaped charm remained in the drawer, untouched. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. I looked the same face, same eyes, but the way I held myself had shifted. My shoulders were relaxed, my gaze steady. There was no question in my eyes anymore, no silent asking to be chosen. That was new. I ran into Lena again a week before my departure. She was standing outside the cafe near campus, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with frustration. When she saw me, she stopped mid-sentence. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then something close to resentment. "You're leaving," she said after hanging up. "Yes." "So you're just giving up?" I considered her words carefully. "No," I replied. "I'm moving forward."
She scoffed.
"You always act like you're above everything." I met her gaze evenly. I stopped competing. The truth unsettled her. Without my resistance, there was nothing left to push against. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Ethan's been off lately." "I know," I replied. "You don't care?" I thought about it honestly, then shook my head. "Not in the way you think." She studied me as if seeing me for the first time. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, trapped in a cycle I had finally stepped out of. Almost. On my last night on campus, I sat alone in the music hall. The stage lights were dim, the rows of seats empty. I played softly, letting my fingers wander, letting emotion guide sound without structure. Each note echoed into the quiet, filling the space with something intimate and unguarded. When I finished, I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence that followed. It didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. As I packed my suitcase later, my phone buzzed once more. "Ethan, I heard you're leaving. Can we talk?" Just once. I stared at the message, then turned the phone face down. Some conversations don't need closure. The morning I left, the sky was clear. I walked toward the airport with light steps, my bag steady on my shoulder, my heart unburdened. As the city receded behind me, I realized something quietly profound. I hadn't lost love. I had outgrown it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't expect to see Ethan at the airport. The terminal buzzed with movement, rolling suitcases, distant announcements, voices overlapping in 100 languages. I stood near the departure gate, passport tucked safely into my bag, my boarding pass folded neatly between my fingers. Everything felt unreal, like I was stepping into someone else's life. A better one. Then I heard my name. I turned. He was standing a few steps away, breathless, hair slightly disheveled, eyes scanning my face as if searching for something familiar. Regret, maybe.
Hope.
Or the version of me he had left behind. "You're really going," he said. "Yes." The simplicity of my answer seemed to disarm him. "I didn't know you'd leave like this," he continued, voice low. "Without saying goodbye." I tilted my head slightly. "We've already said everything that matters." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his composure. "You didn't even give me a chance to fix things." I looked at him carefully, at the man who had once been my shelter, who now felt like a memory I had finally put down. "You had years," I said gently. The words weren't angry. They didn't need to be. His jaw tightened. "You think I didn't care?" "I think you cared," I replied. "Just not enough to choose differently." For a moment, the noise around us faded. It was just the two of us, suspended between what had been and what could never be again. I saw something flicker in his eyes then, panic, sharp and unmasked. "I broke things off with Lena," he said suddenly. The confession hung in the air. I blinked once. "When?" "Yesterday," he said quickly. "I realized I made a mistake." I absorbed the information calmly. Somewhere in another version of me, those words might have shattered walls, reopened wounds. In this version, they simply passed through. "I'm glad you figured that out," I said. "For your own sake." His expression faltered. "That's it." "Yes." "You don't want to try again?" His voice cracked slightly. "After everything?" I searched my feelings carefully, making sure of my answer. There was no anger there. No longing. Only clarity.
No.
The final boarding call echoed through the terminal. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I can change. I swear I will." I believed that he meant it, and I still said, "I know." He stared at me, desperation surfacing. "Then why isn't that enough?" "Because love isn't about potential," I thought. "It's about presence." Aloud, I said, "Because I already changed." A long silence followed. People moved around us, weaving in and out of our moment, unaware that something was ending forever in the middle of a crowded terminal. Ethan looked at me as if memorizing my face, as if afraid that once I turned away, I would truly be gone. "I don't recognize you anymore," he said quietly. I smiled softly. That's the point. When I turned to leave, he didn't follow. At the gate, I paused briefly and looked back. He was still standing there, alone now, hands clenched at his sides, surrounded by people yet entirely separate from them. For the first time, I saw him the way I had once seen myself, waiting for someone who had already chosen to move on. I felt no satisfaction in that symmetry. Only a gentle sadness for what we both had lost, and a deeper gratitude for what I was gaining. As I walked down the jet bridge, each step felt lighter than the last. Crossing that threshold wasn't just about distance. It was about identity. I took my seat by the window, fastening my seatbelt as the plane prepared for departure. Outside, the city blurred into something small and distant. When the aircraft lifted off the ground, I closed my eyes and let the motion carry me forward. I didn't look back. The city I moved to didn't greet me with fireworks or dramatic moments. It welcomed me quietly. Morning light spilled through tall windows, soft and unfamiliar. The air carried a different rhythm, faster, sharper, alive. People walked with purpose, Coffee in hand, eyes forward, lives unfolding in parallel lines that never quite touched. No one knew who I used to be here. No one expected me to fit into an old role. I loved that. My apartment was small, almost sparse, but it felt intentional. I placed my books carefully on the shelf, arranged my plants near the window, set my keyboard in the corner, where the light fell best in the afternoon. Every object I chose had meaning. Every space reflected choice, not compromise. Work filled my days in a way that challenged rather than consumed me. The fellowship demanded focus, curiosity, resilience, qualities I had cultivated quietly without realizing it. My mentors treated me as capable, not fragile. They asked for my opinions and listened when I spoke. For the first time, I felt trusted with my own ambition. At night, I walked alone through streets that hummed with energy. Music drifted from open windows. Laughter echoed from cafes. Sometimes I sat on a bench and simply watched strangers crossing paths, sharing moments that didn't involve me and didn't need to. There was a freedom in being unobserved. Memories still surfaced, but they no longer hurt. They arrived like distant echoes, recognizable, but softened by time and distance. Ethan appeared occasionally in my thoughts, not as a loss, but as a lesson. I saw our past clearly now, without romantic distortion. I understood where I had diminished myself, where I had mistaken endurance for love. That clarity felt like a gift. One evening, as I practiced piano in a shared rehearsal space, someone paused in the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting," a voice said gently. I looked up to see a man about my age, holding a violin case, eyes warm with genuine curiosity rather than expectation. "Not at all," I replied. "You play like you're telling a story," he said. "One that doesn't need an audience." I smiled, surprised. "That's the best kind." We talked for a while, about music, about the city, about nothing in particular. When he left, he didn't ask for my number. He simply said, "Maybe I'll hear you play again." I appreciated that. Connection, I learned, didn't have to demand ownership. Weeks passed, then months. I grew into routines that felt like rituals. Morning walks, evening practice, weekend markets. Friendships formed slowly, organically, without urgency. I laughed more. I rested without guilt. I trusted myself in ways I never had before. One afternoon, while sorting through old emails, I found a message from Ethan dated weeks earlier. I must have missed it during the move. "I hope you're happy. I'm trying to be better." I read it once, then closed the laptop. I didn't feel the need to reply. Not because I was angry, but because my happiness no longer needed his acknowledgement. On a quiet Sunday, I stood on my balcony watching the sun dip below the skyline. The city glowed in soft hues of gold and violet. As the light faded, I felt something settle inside me, a sense of arrival. Not at a destination, but within myself. I had once feared that leaving would mean losing everything. Instead, it gave me back my life. Years later, when people ask me how my life changed so completely, I never know how to answer in a way that fits neatly into conversation. I could say it happened when I left the city, or when I boarded a plane with one suitcase and a quiet resolve, or when I chose myself for the first time. But the truth is simpler and harder. It changed the moment I stopped asking someone else to see my worth. Life has a way of folding moments into memory until they lose their sharp edges. What once felt unbearable becomes instructive. What once broke you becomes the reason you recognize strength in others. I don't think about Ethan often anymore, but when I do, there's no bitterness in the thought. Only understanding. We were young in the ways that mattered. Not in age, but in emotional fluency. We loved with borrowed definitions, mistaking endurance for devotion and familiarity for safety. We didn't know then that love isn't proven by how much you're willing to lose, but by how much you're encouraged to become. Some people enter your life to stay. Others enter to show you the door you're afraid to walk through alone. I learned that loving someone doesn't obligate you to shrink for them. That loyalty isn't silence. That patience should never cost you your voice. These lessons didn't arrive gently. They arrived through fractures, small ones at first, then deep, undeniable breaks that forced me to choose between comfort and truth. I chose truth. There were nights after the move when loneliness brushed against me softly, like a memory testing whether it was still welcome. I let it pass. I learned that solitude isn't emptiness when it's chosen. It's space, fertile, necessary, alive with possibility. In that space, I became someone steadier. Not louder, not hardened, just rooted. I stopped measuring my value by how indispensable I was to others. I stopped performing emotional labor as proof of love. I began to understand that real connection feels mutual, not negotiated. And when love found me again, not dramatically, not urgently, but gradually, I recognized it by how safe it felt to remain myself. No tests. No sacrifices disguised as virtue. No fear of being replaced. Just presence. If I could speak to the version of myself who stayed too long, I wouldn't scold her. I would thank her for surviving what she didn't yet know how to leave. I would tell her that outgrowing something doesn't mean it was a mistake. It means it served its purpose. Not all love stories end in togetherness. Some end in clarity. And clarity, I've learned, can be just as transformative. So when someone asks me how I found my strength, I don't point to a single moment. I point to a series of quiet decisions, unanswered messages, packed bags, steady steps forward, each one choosing self-respect over familiarity. That is how lives change. Not all at once, but for good.